Okay, welcome everybody to Go in 5 Minutes, episode 4. Today we're going to talk about WebSockets. I want to first remind everyone that I really appreciate you guys suggesting new topics or giving +1s on existing topics on that GitHub issues page. I'm really listening to those, so I'd love for you guys to keep those ideas coming or keep those votes coming. So before we start here, I want to leave a little note. The code that we're going to show today is adapted from a post that Gary Bird wrote. And he super generously gave his permission to use that code today. So Gary, if you're watching, thanks so much. Really appreciate it. So let's get into it. WebSockets solve the problem in a really efficient way of communicating from the server down to the browser, and then likewise from the browser back up to the server. It is an HTML5 standard that has replaced some of the previous approaches to solve this problem, like something we've called dumb polling or long polling. So WebSockets essentially open up a single socket from the browser up to the server through a HTML5 upgrade mechanism. And of course you can use that link to go and read a ton more details about the protocol. And because we have a single socket open that has duplex communication from the server down to the browser and then likewise from the browser up to the server, we get a ton of efficiency gains. We get network traffic efficiency gains. If it's a mobile phone, there's tons of battery life gains. There's connections, number of connections is reduced. And there's a couple more, and you can read about those all over the web. So there are some obvious uses for WebSockets. You can really easily implement chat, which is what we're going to show today. You can stream data down from the browser to the from the server down to the browser, and so on and so forth. So without further ado, let's get into the examples. So we've got a simple server here. This should probably look pretty familiar to you guys. We've got something called a connection, which essentially is the wrapper for the WebSocket itself, the WebSocket connection, We've got a reader and a writer, which are essentially a Go routine that accepts data from the browser to the server, and then the writer is the Go routine that writes data from the server back down to the browser. And then most importantly, we've got this thing called a hub. And the hub is a publish-subscribe mechanism. So that reader that I showed before, that's the thing that takes data from the browser, which in this case is a chat message. It sends it on over to the hub, and then the hub will broadcast that data to all the other WebSocket connections, and eventually that data will get down to the writer for all those other connections, and the writer will write it back down to the browser so that everybody else who's listening in the chat session will see that chat message. And you can see here, this is that core publish subscribe go routine. So we've got listening on the broadcast channel here. We're going over all of the connections that are currently subscribed to the broadcast channel. And then here in this case statement on the select, we try to send to each of the connection send channels, which the writer is listening on. And then of course, we've got to do some error handling here. So if there's no writer listening on that send channel for that specific connection, we just time out and then we remove the connection from the hub because we assume that there's no longer anybody listening. And we've got some adders and removers here, two funcs that can add a connection to the hub, to the publish subscribe, and then we can also remove the connection from the hub, and you see that used up here on line 40. Okay, so let's get into an example here and see that this thing actually works. So we had one running already. Let's just close that down. We'll show building it just the normal way. Okay, we're going to run it now. Okay, so we've got a WebSocket server running. So we're going to go in. We're going to use that /endpoint to load some HTML. Simple chat window here. And we're going to go open another chat window. Okay, so now we've got two WebSocket connections. And if you guys try this at home, you can go into Firebug if you're on Firefox or the Chrome developer tools or whatever other web development tools you may use. And you can see the actual WebSocket connections open. So, okay, both chat windows are empty. Let's put a message into one. Hello, Gophers. We can see it in this window, but then let's go to the other window. And of course, you can see, without reloading it, we can see the Hello, Gophers message. Now that message went up through the reader on this WebSocket connection here. It went into the hub, It got published to the writer for this WebSocket connection and then sent back down to the browser. And it's as simple as that. So you can go into the code here. It's open source as usual. You can play around with it and do plenty more stuff with those connections in the hub. And I'd encourage you guys to do so, and also look at some of your web applications. If you don't have that server down to browser communication or that duplex communication, I'd encourage you to think about whether or not you could benefit from having it. So that's all for today. And I'd like to remind you guys to remind you guys again to go in and vote on some of those issues, because next week, as I do normally, I'm going to use some of those votes to decide which topics to cover. So thank you guys again, and I'll look forward to seeing you next week. Take care.